Oh, come in, come in. Oh, how good to see you. Come away in. Let me close the door behind you if you like. Come and have a seat. Good to see you again. So you'll see, I'm smoking my beautiful Meerschaum Dragon's Claw pipe, which is a favourite. And it's another of the ones that I think is particularly appropriate to reading Tolkien. We had a little dip into Tolkien last time, but I thought we might do it again. For quite a gentle, but actually central passage. It's a moment of revelation, or of the beginning, the opening of a revelation that will set up the structure of the entire story. But he locates it on a lovely spring morning. Or should I put it an autumn morning? Yeah, it's a lovely morning, and Gandalf and Frodo are sitting outside, and Gandalf is smoking a pipe, which is why I thought I'd like to smoke this. It's from the Great Shadow of the Past chapter in the first of the three books, The Fellowship. Yes, it is spring. And they've just begun to have a conversation the night before, in which Gandalf briefly reveals some of his suspicions about the ring. But you may remember he says, look, it's a bit late, we don't want to talk about this stuff late at night. So this is a fresh spring morning. You've got to like a sentence that begins next morning after a late breakfast. That's my kind of morning. Somebody should do a study of the number of times the word breakfast appears in the Lord of the Rings. Anyway, next morning, after a late breakfast, the wizard was sitting with Frodo by the open window of the study. They're indoors. A bright fire was on the hearth, but the sun was warm and the wind was in the south. Everything looked fresh and new, and the new green of spring was shimmering in the fields and on the tips of the trees' fingers. Isn't that beautiful? That shimmering green on the tips of the trees' fingers. Gandalf was thinking of a spring nearly 80 years before, when Bilbo had run out of Bag End without a handkerchief. His hair was perhaps whiter than it had been then, and his beard and eyebrows were perhaps longer, and his face more lined with care and with wisdom. But his eyes were bright as ever, and he smoked and blew smoke rings with the same vigour and delight. It's a lovely, gentle opening. But of course it's a setting in which peril is to be revealed. He was smoking now in silence, for Frodo was sitting still, deep in thought. Even in the light of morning, he felt a dark shadow of the tidings that Gandalf had brought. At last he broke the silence. Last night you began to tell me strange things about my ring, Gandalf, he said. And then you stopped because you said that such matters were best left until daylight. Don't you think you had better finish now? You say the ring is dangerous, far more dangerous than I can guess. In what way? I'm talking about dangerous and the shadows of war. We haven't a jet exercising over there. I hope you can still hear me. Dangerous in what way? In Eregion long ago, many elven rings were made, magic rings as you call them. They were, of course, of various kinds, some more potent and some less. The lesser rings were only essays in the craft before it was full grown. Remember when I read that sentence, being puzzled by the use of the word essay, because I thought an essay was a thing I wrote at school. But of course, Tolkien, the linguist, is doing a beautiful thing. He's taking you back to the roots of the word essay, essays in the craft, which is the French verb essayer, to try. When we're learning in academia as we become students, we write essays, and they're little tries, they're little goes at it, seeing how you could manage it. I wish I'd been told that, by my pastors and masters back in the day. They wouldn't have weighed so heavily on my week if they had known there were only little essays, little essayer in the cross. The lesser rings were only essays in the craft before it was full grown, and to the elven smiths they were but trifles, yet still to my mind dangerous for mortals. But the great rings, the rings of power, they were perilous. A mortal, Frodo, who keeps one of the great rings does not die, but he does not grow or obtain more life. He merely continues until at last every minute is weariness. Oh, that's devastatingly prophetic writing, isn't it? I mean, the whole question of just merely prolonging one's existence, a minute of anything, what's to exist or to live truly and really, one of the issues of our day. Until every minute is weariness. And if he often uses the ring to make himself invisible, he fades. He becomes in the end invisible permanently, walks in the twilight under the eye of the dark power that rules the rings. Yes, sooner or later if he is strong or well-meaning to begin with, but neither strength nor good purpose will last. Sooner or later, the dark power will devour him. How terrifying, said Frodo. There was another long silence. The sound of Sangamgee cutting the lawn came in from the garden. Of course, that's preparing us for Sam coming up under the eaves. How long have you known this? Asked Frodo at length, and how did Bilbo know? How much did Bilbo know? Bilbo knew no more than he told you, I'm sure, said Gandalf. He would certainly have never passed on to you anything he thought would be a danger, even though I promised to look after you. He thought the ring was very beautiful and very useful at need. And then if anything was wrong or queer, he thought it was himself. He said that it was growing on his mind, and he was always worrying about it. But he did not suspect that the ring itself was to blame. Though he had found out that the thing needed looking after, it did not seem always the same size or weight. It shrank or expanded in an odd way and might suddenly slip off a finger where it had been tight, which of course it had done. When Bilbo found it, it slipped from Gollum's hand, as Gollum was no longer useful. Yes, he warned me of that in his last letter, said Frodo, so I've always kept it on its chain. Very wise, said Gandalf. But as for his long life, Bilbo never connected it with the ring at all. He took all the credit for that for himself, and he was very proud of it, though he was getting restless and uneasy. Thin and stretched, he said, a sign that the ring was getting control. How long have you known all this? Asked Frodo again. Known? Said Gandalf. I have known much that only the wise know, Frodo. But if you mean known about this ring, well, I still do not know, one might say. I do not know, one might say. There is a last test to make. But I no longer doubt my guess. When did I first begin to guess? He mused, searching back in memory. Let me see. It was in the year that the White Council drove the dark power from Mirkwood, just before the Battle of the Five Armies, that Bilbo found his ring. A shadow fell on my heart then, though I did not know what I feared. I wondered how often Gollum came by a great ring, as plainly it was. That at least was clear to me from the first. Then I heard Bilbo's strange story of how he had won it, and I could not believe it. When I at last got the truth out of him, I saw at once that he'd been trying to put his claim to the ring beyond doubt, much like Gollum with his birthday present. The lies were too much alike for my comfort. Clearly the ring had an unwholesome power that set to work on its keeper at once. That was the first real warning I had that all was not well. I told Bilbo often that such rings were better left unused, but he resented it and soon got angry. There was little else that I could do. I could not take it from him without doing greater harm, and I had no right to do so. Anyway, that's just a really remarkable thing. I had no right to do it. There's the difference between Gandalf and Saruman. He's a great wizard. He has immense power. He could take things. He could tell himself, I'm wiser than you are. I know better than you what's good for you. I'm going to take it from you. But he recognizes the rights, the inalienable rights of the weak, the Hobbit in this case, and he holds back his power in respect for those rights. And that's a kind of fundamental idea about gentleness, about courtesy, about honouring one another, which just is woven in, and you scarcely notice it. It's only when later you see what it's like to be in the presence and power of somebody who has power but doesn't recognise rights that you really find yourself understanding what rights were always about and what they were for. And it's something we need to know as much now as was needed then. I had no right. I could not take it from him without doing great harm, and I had no right to do so anyway. I could only watch and wait. I might perhaps have consulted Saruman the White, but something always held me back. It's really interesting how Gandalf, even when he doesn't know something, he says, I felt in my heart, or a shadow crawl, something. There's a kind of deeper wisdom at work in Gandalf, even than he himself knows. Who is he? Asked Frodo. I have never heard of him, so I'm reading you this passage today because, of course, last time we met, I read you the passage where they fear that they're about to see Saruman, and then they realise it's Gandalf. And, of course, Gandalf, if you like, has become what Saruman should have been. So I thought it'd be nice to go back and see how the contrast between the two wizards is set up for us very early. Who is he? Asked Frodo. I've never heard of him before. Maybe not, answered Gandalf. Hobbits are or were of no concern of his. Yet he is great among the wise. He is the chief of my order and the head of the council. His knowledge is deep, but his pride has grown with it, and he takes ill any meddling. The lore of the elven rings, great and small, is his province. He has long studied it, seeking the lost secrets of their making. But when the rings were debated in the council, all that he would reveal to us of his ring lore told against my fears, because we now know that Saruman thought the one ring must be somewhere and was trying to find it for himself. So my doubts slept, but uneasily. Still I watched and waited. All seemed well with Bilbo, and the years passed. Yes, they passed, and they seemed not to touch him. He showed no signs of age. The shadow fell on me again. But I said to myself, after all, he comes from a long-lived family on his mother's side. There is time yet. Wait. And I waited until the night when he left his house. He said and did things then that filled me with a fear that no words of Saruman could allay. I knew at last that something dark and deadly was at work, and I've spent most of the years since then in finding out the truth of it. Oh, there wasn't any permanent harm done, was there? Asked Frodo anxiously. He would get all right in time, wouldn't he? Be able to rest in peace, I mean. That's beautiful. Frodo thinking first of Bilbo. He himself is now the possessor of what he becomes to realise is an increasingly perilous ring that might be working on him. But his first thought is what became of Bilbo. He felt better at once, said Gandalf. But there is only one power in this world that knows all about the rings and their effects. And as far as I know, there is no power in the world that knows all about hobbits. Among the wise, I am the only one who goes in for hobbit lore. An obscure branch of knowledge, but full of surprises. You somehow feel that this is a sentence or a sentiment that has fallen from Tolkien's lips before. I'm an etymologist. I'd studied the long origins and meanings of an obscure branch of learning, but not without its surprises. But full of surprises. Soft as butter they can be, and yet sometimes tough as old tree roots. I think it likely that some would resist the rings far longer than most of the wise would believe. I don't think you need worry about Bilbo. Of course, he possessed the ring for many years and used it, and it might take a long while for the influence to wear off before it was safe for him to see it again, for instance. Another setup for something to come. Otherwise, he might live on for years quite happily, just stop as he was when he parted with it. For he gave it up in the end of his own accord. An important point. No, I was not troubled about dear Bilbo anymore once he had let the thing go. It is for you that I feel responsible. Ever since Bilbo left, I've been deeply concerned about you and about all these charming, absurd, helpless hobbits. It would be a grievous blow to the world if the dark power overcame the Shire, if all your kind, jolly, stupid Bulgers, hornblowers, boffins, and bracegirdles, and the rest, not to mention the ridiculous Bagginses, became enslaved. Frodo shuddered. But why should we be, he asked, and why should he want such slaves? To tell you the truth, replied Gandalf, I believe that hitherto, mark you, he has entirely overlooked the existence of hobbits. You should be thankful, but your safety has passed. He does not need you, he has many more useful servants, but he won't forget you again, and hobbits as miserable slaves would please him far more than hobbits happy and free. There is such a thing as malice and revenge. Boy, Tolkien, he defends this in his essay on fairy stories. Tolkien and Lewis along with him were accused by the sort of literary establishment of the day of being escapist, of not facing up to the real issues in the world and just escaping into this sitting around drinking frothy beer and having medieval fantasies. But nothing could be less escapist than this. The realization that there are rights, the realization that precious, beautiful, simple things, ordinary people living their ordinary lives and getting on with it, might be overshadowed by powers motivated actually by malice and revenge. Well, he'd been a soldier in the First War, but the Second War came. There was a power at work which would rather have miserable slaves than happy people. And such powers, frankly, are still at work in the world today. So far from finding this escapist, I find this absolutely thrillingly bringing me to the edge of issues that we all face. Revenge, said Frodo. Revenge for what? I still don't understand what all this has to do with Bilbo and myself and our ring. It has everything to do with it, said Gandalf. You do not know the real peril yet, but you shall. I was not sure of it myself when I was last here, but the time has come to speak. Give me the ring for a moment. And of course, you know what happens next to me. But, it amazes me every time I go back to this book that even the slightest passage is so rich. The poet in me has that lovely thing about the leaves stretching out, the trees, the fingertips of the trees, brilliant poetic insight. And, the social person, me, this person who lives in the moral realm in community with other people, is deeply spoken to by that. It's extraordinary. And of course, in the sheer art of setting up what needs to be set up for the whole rest of the novel, it's brilliantly done. And it's all in this conversation on a spring morning with a pipe and two old friends talking. So anyway, speaking of old friends talking, it's nice to have you here and to come back again when you can. Good to see you. Cheers.